Hello, this SOLIDWORKS demo will cover bringing your chosen disposable bottle into SOLIDWORKS, tracing the image, and then specifically getting into the revolve and fillet features to make the bottle into a 3D form. To begin with, we want to gather some information on the bottle. So firstly, you want to get the overall diameter or the width. You want to get the height. If you don't have big calipers, you can use edges of a book and a ruler to get these measurements. You also want to get the height of the cap and the diameter or the width of the cap um, and write those down. It also would help to get a clean image of your bottle. In this case, this is a scan with a piece of paper behind it to kind of give it a white background with some Photoshop editing to clean it up. There are some shortcomings of a scan, which I'll get to later. Another option would be to use a photo like this. This one also has shortcomings, which I'll mention. So to start off with, we want to create a new file. So go to File and New. If you don't see this, you likely need to click on Advanced at the bottom, go to your Files tab, and find the Part 450 template, and click OK. The first thing we're going to do is create a bounding box sketch, and we're going to do that on the front plane. So we're going to select on the front plane and enter Sketch World. And we do that by navigating to the Sketch tab up here and clicking on this icon, or we can use the hotkey Alt and S as in Sketch, or Option S if you are on a Mac. So now we're in Sketch World. Unfortunately, SOLIDWORKS doesn't give us a lot of visual clues that we are there, other than these icons in the top right and this depressed icon on the top left. The first thing we're going to do is create a line that's the height of our bottle. So I'm going to hit L for line, but you can also find the icon right there. And I'm just simply going to click a line off to the side. You can make it however you want. This is the first click is the first endpoint. The next click is the second endpoint. If I hover the line vertically, it'll add a rule of vertical, which is one we want. You can see it allows us to keep making lines, but to get out of this, I can just hit escape. So here we have our first line, and you can see because I hovered it vertically, it added that rule automatically, that relationship automatically. Another relation we want is for the line to be coincident or touching the origin. Again, the origin is incredibly important. It's the 0 point from which everything in your file will be dimensioned. So I'm going to click on the origin, and I'm going to hold down Control and click on the line to select both of them, and then I'm going to select the option here of coincident. We now want to dimension our line to be the height of our bottle. So I'm going to hit D for dimension, or you can find the icon up here. And then I'm simply just going to click on the line and drag this off to the side. And now it will prompt me for that value. So I measured my bottle to be 8.75 inches tall, and then I'm going to click the green check mark. It doesn't look like anything changed, but the scale has now been set, the proportion has been set to this line. The next thing I want to do is set the height of the cap from the origin. So I'm still I still have the dimension tool. I know that because of the icon near my cursor, and I can also see here it still says dimension and it's depressed here. And now instead of clicking the entire line, I'm going to set a dimension from 2 points. So I'm going to hover over the origin, it turns orange. I'm going to click on that. And I'm going to hover over this endpoint and click on that. And I'm going to drag my line off to the dimension off to the side. And now when it prompts me for the height, I'll enter the height of my cap, which is 0.65 inches, and click that checkbox. And that gives us our first line. To get out of the dimension tool, I'm going to click escape. And now I'm going to draw a horizontal line. We want this horizontal line to be the width of the cap. So again, I'm going to either click on this icon here or hit L for line. Whoops, L for line, there we go. And we want this line to be horizontal and coincident, actually to be a midpoint to the origin. So you can see if I hover my cursor here, it's going to give me blue dotted lines when it's coincident to the origin. So I'm going to click my first endpoint there. And I'm going to hover it horizontally. You can see it's horizontal because of the yellow square near the pencil's eraser there. And then I'm going to click on this left side here. And then again, escape to get out of the line tool. You can see the line we created is black. That's because it has the rules automatically applied of horizontal and coincident. Again, in this case, coincident to the origin. But we don't want it to just be coincident. We actually want it to be centered there. So I'm going to select the origin. I'm going to hold down Control and select the line. And then I'm going to tell it to be midpoint. So now when I drag on these endpoints, you can see that this line will always be centered on the origin. Finally, we want to add a dimension to this line to be the width of our cap. So I'm going to hit D for dimension. click on the line, and in this case my cap is 1.2 inches wide, and click on the checkbox. The last thing we're going to add to this sketch is a rectangle, which will be our bounding box. I went ahead and clicked on the icon here, or you can hit R for rectangle. There's different kinds of rectangles. I default to the corner style, where you click in opposite corners to create it. So I'm just going to click down here and up here, hit escape to get out of the tool, and now we want to set the rules. So I want this endpoint of my vertical line, holding control to also select the bottom edge of the rectangle. I want these two to have a relationship of midpoint so that the rectangle is centered on here. And I want the same to be true for the top endpoint and the top edge. And so now I have my bounding box height set, and I can see it's centered because as I drag it, both ends change symmetrically. And the final thing I want to do is set the width of my bottle, which again we'll use with the Smart Dimension tool, or so you can hit D for dimension and click on this top edge and set the number to match your bottle diameter. In my case is 2.88 inches. And there you have it. This is our starting sketch, which is our bounding box. To exit Sketch World, you either want to click on the icon up here or carefully select the blue arrow. If you select the red X, it will undo your work, so avoid doing that. I think it will prompt you though before that happens. So I'm going to go ahead and click the blue arrow to exit out. And now we're outside of Sketch World. We know that because the sketch is now gray and these icons are gone. Now is also a good time to go ahead and file, save, to make sure you don't lose your work. So you can call it whatever you want, bottle, your initials, and the date, and click save. So the next thing we want to do is bring in an image of our bottle. So like I mentioned, you can either photograph it wide, you want to kind of get a far image of it, or you can scan it. So the good thing with a scanner is the bottom is flat and the top is flat. It gives you kind of an orthographic view. The problem is it loses a bit of detail on the edge, so this bottle will come in a bit skinnier than it actually is. Here you'll get a more true edge, however the top will have a bit of a curve and the bottom will have a bit of a curve. So there's good and bad to both, either works. No matter what, you want to default to the bounding box. The way that we bring the image in is we want to create a new sketch on the front plane, so we'll repeat the process as before. I'm going to select the front plane over here and click on the sketch icon, and now we are back in Sketch World, albeit a different sketch than the first one we created. Again, we see our icons up here. The command we want is sketch picture. If for some reason you don't see it, you can always search for commands up here. You want to just make sure this black box is here. If you don't see a black box here, by dropping down this menu, you can select commands, and that allows you to search for commands. So again, I can type in sketch picture, and you can in fact drag tools and options here if you need to. So I'm going to click on, I'm going to click on this, and it will bring up this dialog. I'm going to find this image that I have edited in Photoshop and cleaned up. And here you can see it brings it in. It's just, again, it's just bringing that image in. The blue line is kind of an orientation thing, but honestly, you can ignore it. The main thing we want are these bounding boxes. So I'm going to start by dragging the corners so as to not distort the image to get it close. If for some reason you don't see your bounding box, the hotkey you want is Alt-V. It will hide and show your sketches, or again, Option-V on a Mac. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to default to the height. Again, always trust your bounding box and your physical measurements over your image. If you need to double check your bottle or what have you, you can always do that. And like I mentioned, the scan, it just comes in a bit skinnier. Now that I have this aligned to the height, I'm going to trust my bounding box and my physical measurements. I'm going to come over here and uncheck the lock aspect ratio so that I can now start to distort my bottle to fit the bounding box. And I'm just going to drag these edges out all the way until, until it, again, I'm clicking on the yellow dot. The reason I started moving the whole bottle is I accidentally clicked on the full image. You can always kind of zoom in and double check the cap and are things about the right size. And again, the main goal of this is to get it close. You can see here if you need to like rotate it a little bit, depending on how things came in. You can play with this setting just to kind of get it dialed in. It doesn't have to be perfect. Again, it's just reference, so just get it close. All right, and there you have it. So now our image is in. If it bothers you, like in terms of, if you ever need to edit it again, you can double click on the image and it'll bring this dialog back up. If it's like a bit distracting, maybe you didn't take the time to Photoshop it and there's this busy background, you can always go down here to transparency and select full image and just kind of drag this slider to whatever % transparent you want it to be, and then click that checkbox. And so now we're going to exit this sketch. And again, we're going to do that. Don't hit the red X, but you can do that by clicking the blue arrow or the icon up here. So now we have 2 sketches. The next sketch we want is to trace the bottle. And this is sort of the meat and potatoes of this demo, one of the main points. So we're going to create another front plane sketch, and we're going to do that the same way. Select the front plane, and this time I'll use my hotkey Alt-S or Option-S in a Mac to enter sketch world. Again, if you don't see these previous sketches, it's Alt-V to show it. And now what we want to do is we want to trace the bottle. We want to ignore the cap. We'll get to that later. But we want to work our way around. And this is kind of learned over time, the best way to do this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the bounding box. So I'm going to start here with this kind of long straightaway. I'm going to hit L to create a line. And I'm actually going to select this bounding box line. You can see even though we're not in this original sketch, we can still make things related to it. So I'm going to click on this edge and come down here until like this arc starts to curve away from us. And click on that. And now here is kind of our label area of our bottle. This is what's known as the shoulder of the bottle. It kind of, looks like a person, and maybe this is where it starts to taper in. This is unsurprisingly called the neck. So I'm going to hit L for line. I'm going to select this shoulder point and bring this in. Again, kind of getting close to the image. When we get to the neck, I'm just going to make a vertical line here. Now this is what's called the neck finish or the neck flange. I'm just going to zoom in with my middle mouse roll button. I'm going to click here. I know it's at a slight taper. I'm going to create this edge and come back in. And I know here this is where the opening of the bottle comes up. And so I'm just going to create a vertical line and then come back to the center here and click on this center line from our bounding box and hit escape. So again, I'm ignoring the cap. Some settings we want, so I'm going to hit D for dimension. We want the top of our opening to be about 0.1 inches from the top of the cap. This is about a 2 millimeter gap, just roughly representing the thickness of the cap that will be there. Now you'll notice that there are some like curves here. We can see the soft curve and soft curve here. There is no right or wrong here. If you would prefer to sketch this as a curve, you could. My reasoning and my general rule of thumb is if the curve is just sort of a small detail, I tend to pick a fillet command for that, which we'll get to later. But if it's a design detail like here, where it's kind of swoopy and it comes in and out, that's where I'll tend to use an arc. So I see a fillet feature as kind of a finishing option, and it makes your life just a little bit easier. You can see here that the tracing is just a little less fussy, and I'll show you how to use fillets after this. But when it comes to sort of these design details, I'll create some arcs. So I'm going to hit A for arc, or again, you can find it here. Again, there's different options. Whoops, I'm sorry. There's different options, but I tend to default to 3-point arc. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this endpoints. And there is sort of a judgment call here. You want to get the arc bending the right way. And then I'm going to click here to get it this kind of curve inwards. And then finally click on this endpoint here and all the way. I'm actually going to click on the endpoint of the bounding box here and curve this out. And again, there is a curve on the bottom of the bottle here, but to me this is a detail curve, not a design curve. So that's going to be a fillet. Now the one thing to be aware of as you sketch these arcs is they really should all be tangent. If you don't set the tangent relationship, you'll get like a seam across here, which if, we're not going to render this bottle, but if you did, that seam would show up. It would be kind of a harsh break. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click both of these arcs while holding Control. And then in the relationship, I'm going to say be tangent. And I'm also going to make sure that I do that into the straight line. I'm going to say tangent. So actually when I click on this arc, you should see there's 2 tangent rules. It's tangent to the start point with the straight line, and it's tangent to its next neighbor, which is the arc down here. I'm going to do the same thing with these two. I'm going to select both, and I'm going to tell them to be tangent. So there you have it. We kind of have this edge of the bottle. We want to control a couple other things now with dimensions, and part of that is so that the overall goal of setting up a proper sketch is that we can change the width and the height of the bounding box to get different volume and have our model rebuild so that it's robust. So there's a couple of things we want to do. It's good practice to dimension from the origin. So I hit D for dimension. I'm now going to click on the origin, and I'm now going to click on the point in the shoulder. And you'll notice like the smart dimension can snap where you want it. In this case, we want the height, so I'm going to have it snap vertically like this. And I'm not even going to fuss with that number. This is where the image makes our life a little bit easier. It kind of is what it is. So dimensioning the origin to the shoulder is a good idea. And then if you have some features down here, and again, this is all personal preference. There's no right or wrong. Bottles are different. But it doesn't hurt, or it's generally a good idea to dimension from the base to whatever feature you have down here. In this case, I'm going to go to kind of like the waist of the bottle, where this label panel ends, and sort of this curving feature goes through. Now, it is important that there is a gap in the dimension here. So if the bottle grows taller proportionally, this is where that distance can come from. And this may make more sense as we do some other exercises in class. One thing I want to make sure I do too is I have this curve, and you can see if I drag on it, it kind of, changes the size and goofs it up. It's probably a good idea to set this arc and holding control and this line and making them tangent. I also want to dimension from the wide edge of the bounding box to here to kind of prevent that from moving around. It's an inexact science, which I know is, not ideal. But it's kind of, you kind of get a feel for it and see kind of what's fixed and what's not. Again, this is sort of just best practice. For example, you could also dimension like how far the neck comes in. I think what's important, however, is dimensioning from this outer edge. If you do some of these dimensions from the center and you want to play with the proportion of the bottle, I think it works better when you're dimensioning to the outer edge, because then the bottle can grow wide or shorter as you need, as you see fit. All right, so that's like the main silhouette. At the bottom, there's something, if you have your physical bottle in hand, that we cannot see in the scan, but it's called a push-up. And we're going to plan ahead for it by creating an arc from the center line to about somewhere here. You can probably measure it if you want. It's roughly, about 1/8 of an inch to 1/4 inch tall. I measured mine at 0.125. And then this gap here, you typically have, it's about 1/4 inch of landing zone all the way around. Now, it is important that if this is revolved, if you imagine, if we revolve this, it's going to give us a sharp point here. So I'm going to create a line for construction and make it tangent to this so that when this revolves, it'll be a smooth relationship. Construction lines are handy. I could also use a construction line here, for example. So I'm going to create a vertical construction line. It starts as a regular line, but then I select it and select the option for construction. And what I can do now is I can dimension this line. Well, actually, the first thing I want to do is select this line and this arc and make them tangent. So now they're snapped to each other. And now I can dimension this outer edge to sort of the lowest point of this arc. And again, this will now control it if I set the bounding box wide. This whole silhouette will move wider with it and not get destroyed. So again, this is sort of the strategy we're going through in setting up a proper sketch. All right, there you have it. I guess the last things I'm going to do is I'm going to complete this sketch by drawing a vertical line all the way to the bottom here, and then a line all the way to this edge in here. And you can see now we've closed off the profile. It's giving us a blue highlight so that it is ready for a feature. So now we're going to exit the sketch. Now some terminology. This is typically what's known as a master sketch. This is what's known as a bounding box. And then this image is sort of our reference that we've traced. And this is just an approach to SolidWorks, a way to build a robust model. That way you can make changes and edits and your tree should rebuild, which this whole project focuses on and should be more clear as we move forward. So the next thing we're going to do is actually start to make this model in 3D. So we're basically going to copy this sketch, and the reason I mentioned this as a master sketch is we want to leave it at the top of our tree. So we're going to create another front plane sketch, so we're going to repeat all the same steps. It's probably a good idea to save at this point. We've kind of done some hard work leading this up. So we're going to create a new front plane sketch the same way we did before, selecting this and then clicking the sketch icon. Now we're in sketch world again. And now what we're going to do is from the tree, we're going to select this bottle trace sketch, which in my case is sketch 3. And I'm going to look for convert entities, or C on the keyboard for copy or convert. And I'm simply just, once I select the sketch 3, I'm going to click on this. And you can see it brings in these black lines, and it literally just copied the sketch we created. You can see, though, it ignored the construction lines. Again, because features are ignore construction lines. Now you can see it copied in the sketch here. And so we have this kind of like filled in area, which we want to be empty for our push-up. So the way we're going to get rid of this is we're going to find the trim entities tool, or T for trim. You want to make sure the setting is trim to closest. And you can see here if I hover, it'll highlight in orange what it's going to delete. And so we just want to go ahead and get rid of these extra lines. And now when I hit escape, we should have a closed shape. I don't know why the blue went away, but we'll try it. So hopefully you have this one complete continuous shape. Now we're going to go to our Features tab and look for Revolved Boss and Base. We're still in Sketch World. This is important because when we click on the Revolve feature, it will try to revolve whatever sketch we are currently in. So now we are encountering a property manager for a feature. This is where it asks for the settings of the feature. Revolve is relatively simple. Anything that's highlighted in blue is sort of like a question. It's prompting us for the axis of revolution. You can think of it as the center line. And here we simply can click on this center black line. You can see it then shows us in yellow roughly what this is going to look like. For our purposes, this is good. You could click the green check, but I just want to walk you through some of these options here. So this is the revolve type. It defaults to blind, which is sort of like you just tell it how many degrees to revolve around. You could have it like revolve up to an endpoint, a vertex. So like I can click an endpoint on the sketch and it'll stop when it gets there. You can have it go to a surface, but we don't have any surfaces to select currently. You could have it offset from a surface, so it doesn't actually go to it, it stops short of it. Or you can select midplane, in which case the revolution will start in the center, whereas blind, it starts on one side. So there's just some different options there. It's good to be aware that that's how the property manager works. This is where you kind of set your commands. So you can go ahead and click the green check, and now you should have a 3D form. If you see like some sort of like wonky geometry here, you can see this is, it's supposed to be a circle, but it looks like a hexagon or a dodecahedron or whatever. This is simply just SolidWorks trying to run quicker and smoother. I believe if you go to Document Properties and Image Quality, you can see here your program will run faster the more sort of geometric it is. If I drag this to the right, it makes it look more like a circle, but my computer will run slower. So I just leave it to the default and just know in good conscience that that is indeed round. So the last thing we want to do is apply fillets or sort of soft radiuses to these harsh edges here. So as I mentioned, this is a detailing tool, not a designing tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the fillet command. Now there are different fillet types. The most common is this one, which you basically select an edge and type in a value, and it will add a curvature of that value to the edge. And that's, 9 times out of 10, that's probably the one you'll be using. The next option here is a variable fillet. So here it kind of gives us different, endpoints to select and type in different values. So if you want the fillet size to change. This next one is a face fillet. This is often more robust than an edge fillet. It can sort of calculate fillets on more complicated edges. It works very similar to this first one, but here, instead of selecting an edge, you select two faces next to each other. And then the final fillet is a full round. This is useful in situations up here like this, where you might want to select three faces, and what it does is you can see the purple face, it turns into a complete curve tangent to the yellow and the pink faces. And again, the image looks a bit choppy because of the low polygon quality. So in this case, what we want to use is just this first fillet type, and I'm going to clear the selections here. It is actually possible, it's worth mentioning, I said you select an edge. You could select a face, in which case it will apply the fillet to all edges of that face. So the first one I'm going to put in here is this bottom footprint, and I measured it to about 1/4 inch. This is basically judged visually. You could also use the image in your sketch to double check, So I'm going to do the base at 1/4 inch and go ahead when I'm happy with that. Click the check mark. Now I want to add some fillets up here. So again, I'm going to click on the fillet feature. I want to put a fillet on this edge. And it's worth noting that you can apply a fillet to multiple edges, as many as you want. The only thing is they're all going to be the same value. So whatever you type this value in, they're going to share it. So anytime you're sharing values, I think it makes sense to select multiple edges. That way you have less commands. It's also just a little bit easier for you. I judge this fillet to be about, 0.85 inches. And these are about the same. And then here, like all these little fussy details around this neck flange, this could be its own fillet. So I'm going to select this inner corner and this top corner, or top edge rather. And here you can see it's not giving us the preview. Sometimes, like if a fillet is too big, and in this case I think it's too big because there's not enough space here to complete it, it won't show you that. So you can see when I type in 0.05, suddenly the fillet appears. And here I can keep clicking the up arrow, and you can see at 0.55 it disappears. So this is like one of the games in SolidWorks is sometimes you're trying to see how big a fillet you can get on there, and sometimes it's limited by the geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and add these inner fillets. You could fillet the outer edge of this neck flange, but often it's pretty sharp, so I'm just going to leave it like that. One way to check your fillets against your image is here you can come to Solid Bodies and right-click on this and click on Change Transparency. And now that way you can see how your fillets kind of align with your image back there. So there you have it. Alt-V will hide all those sketches, and you can kind of see your clean bottle. If you want to change the transparency, you can right-click on the solid body here again and just uncheck this sort of icon. And that is our first step to bringing our bottle into 3D. Thank you for following along.